The air in the Central Receiving Supply Depot, CRSD, was a constant, low-grade abrasion, a metallic, industrial chill that permeated bone and fabric alike. It smelled of ozone, stale inventory manifests, and the thin, sharp scent of hydraulic fluid leaking slowly from an aging forklift parked near Bay 3. Above, the long, yellowing fluorescent tubes hummed a monotonous C-sharp, casting shadows that made the stacking shelves seem taller and the work perpetually dimmer. Cabo Valdez didn't notice the noise anymore. She was a moving part of the static landscape, an anchor of dull, ceaseless motion. Her hands, thick and calloused, guided the industrial mop head across the grimy epoxy floor. The mop itself, a beast of heavy cotton twine, was waterlogged and smelled of commercial disinfectant, a chemical attempt to mask the deeper ingrained odor of sweat and forgotten paper waste that characterized any long-standing military logistical hub. Valdez wore fatigues that had been washed too many times. The camouflage pattern faded to an indeterminate, sad gray-green. Over them, she wore a standard-issue, pale blue synthetic apron, cinched tight at the waist, the universal signifier of her current duty, custodial support. To the base at large, she was simply the lunch lady who handled the overnight scrubbing shifts, sometimes filling in for morning mess hall duty. No one bothered to learn her rank, let alone her name. She breathed deeply, the action pulling the apron taut across her chest. Her face, perpetually set in a mask of indifferent focus, was smudged near the temple where she had absent-mindedly rubbed a speck of dried soap scum. Her movements were economical, almost graceful, lacking the frantic energy of someone trying to rush through a hated task. She moved with the deliberate, heavy certainty of someone who knew the exact calibration needed for every action, a slow, relentless efficiency. The sound of her mop dragging across the floor was suddenly interrupted by a different sound, the crisp, rapid thwack-thwack of highly polished boots approaching from the main corridor. These were not the flat, heavy soles of manual labor or the soft, synthetic tread of specialized infantry boots. These were the boots of administration, designed for parade grounds and linoleum floors. The source of the noise materialized, bathed briefly in the humming fluorescent glare. Sergeant First Class Damon Huntington, Logistics and Material Management, a man whose uniform looked as though it had been pressed with diamond plates. Huntington was a study in immaculate, almost aggressive cleanliness. His rank insignia gleamed, his belt buckle was a mirror, and his frame, though not particularly broad, carried the artificial expansion of absolute, unquestioned local authority. He carried a clipboard like a royal scepter. Huntington stopped precisely 3 feet from where Valdez was attempting to coax a stubborn spill of motor oil and coolant into submission. He didn't acknowledge her presence directly. He addressed the general space above her head. "Cabo," he drawled, the word heavy with contemptuous inquiry. He did not use her name. Valdez stopped the rhythmic sweep. The mop handle, a solid wooden dowel wrapped in black electrical tape, rested in the crook of her elbow. She raised her eyes slowly, meeting his gaze without flinching. Her eyes were a deep, unremarkable brown, but they held a stillness that was unsettling, like water over a deep trench. "Sergeant," Valdez responded, her voice low, raspy, and devoid of inflection. Huntington sniffed, a small, audible sound of displeasure, then glanced pointedly down at her apron, lingering on the pale blue synthetic fabric as if it were contaminated waste. "I require access to the Class 2 stationery stores. We're out of standard issue 8.5 by 11 bond, and my team chief needs the monthly utilization report filed by Aero 900. You are blocking the access aisle." Valdez looked at the heavy steel shelving unit she was mopping around. It was not blocking the aisle. It was obstructing her attempt to reach the far corner. "Affirmative, Sergeant. I will finish the strip down here first. Requires 10 minutes, residual oil stain." She indicated the slick, dark patch. Huntington's polished face darkened, a ripple of annoyance disturbing the smooth surface of his composure. "10 minutes? Cabo, You seem to misunderstand the chain of operational necessity here. The requirement for Class 2 assets outweighs your sanitation agenda. Move the cart. Move the mop. Move yourself. He emphasized the last word, treating the command as a personal declaration of her lower status. Valdez did not move her feet. She shifted the weight of the mop slightly, a micro-adjustment that only added tension to the scene. Sergeant, if I leave this oil residue, it will be a slip hazard for the next 4 hours. Occupational health and safety mandates immediate decontamination. Huntington laughed, a short explosive burst of air that was clearly designed to convey disbelief and mockery. Oh, occupational health and safety? Are you citing regulations to me, Cabo? Let me be clear. I am supply control. I control the inventory that runs this base. You control the water pressure in that bucket. Get out of the way, or I will write you up for obstruction of critical logistics flow. He waited, expecting the immediate apologetic retreat that he was accustomed to receiving from non-essential personnel. But Valdez remained still. She looked at the stain, then at the sergeant, and then, in a move that felt almost seismically significant, she reached into the breast pocket of her faded fatigue jacket and pulled out a small, worn requisition form. It was crumpled and faintly damp. "While you are accessing the stores, Sergeant," she said, her voice remaining level, "I need to acquire 3 items: standard issue disinfectant spray, a box of replacement light bulbs for the barracks utility closet, and, if available, 2 pounds of coffee for the overnight duty station break room. I submitted this 3 days ago. Requisition 919 Beta Delta." Huntington snatched the form with a snap of his wrist, holding it between 2 gloved fingers as if it might infect him with poverty. He scanned the handwritten items with a scowl. "Coffee? Light bulbs? This is a Class 7 mission-critical supply depot, not a general store, Cabo. And I guarantee you those items were either denied or deferred. We are prioritizing critical deployment readiness components, not your little domestic needs." He crumpled the paper and tossed it carelessly toward Valdez's cleaning bucket. It missed, landing on the wet floor. The stillness around Valdez intensified. She looked at the crumpled paper, a small, insignificant piece of trash lying on the floor she had just worked so hard to clean. The movement caused a barely perceptible tremor to run down the line of her jaw. "Sergeant," she began, her voice dropping infinitesimally lower, "the overnight crew runs on that coffee. They are monitoring secure lines, and those light bulbs prevent tripping hazards in the utility closet near the armory annex. It is preventative maintenance. It costs virtually nothing." Huntington leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially, yet maintaining the aggressive edge. "It costs time, Cabo. My time. And that requisition was signed off by you. I see no supervising NCO signature, which means I see no official requirement. You think you can waltz in here smelling a pine sol and demand my precious inventory because you feel like having a better cup of coffee? This isn't a daycare, Cabo. This is the United States military. Now I am finished with this charade. Clear the aisle or I call the duty officer and have you relieved of this equipment." He gestured dismissively at the mop. The tension was stretched so thin it vibrated. Valdez's right hand, which had been resting on the mop handle, flexed once, powerfully. If she chose, she could use that dowel as a very effective short staff. She had done worse with less, but she held the stillness. Suddenly, a new presence intersected the confrontation. There was no thwack-thwack of boots, only a profound silence preceding the newcomer's arrival. The newcomer was a shadow cast by the bright fluorescence, instantly commanding the eye. He stood taller than Huntington, built like a low-slung tank, his movements smooth, almost predatory. He wore the standard field uniform, but it seemed to fit him differently, more like a second skin than a piece of issue clothing. His boots were specialized, designed for gripping loose shale and providing ankle support during rapid, uneven traversal. They were scuffed, but meticulously maintained. He was wearing no rank visible on his front, only a distinct, specialized patch on his shoulder, a simple, stylized representation of a griffin's head, known only to the deepest echelons of interforce cooperation. He was Tier 1, Grom, SEAL, Delta. It didn't matter. He was the quiet professional. He carried a rifle. It was not slung or casual. It was held in a ready position, angled down, the weapon's polished finish reflecting the industrial light. It was clearly customized, a mid-length piston-driven AR variant, heavily modified, bearing the hallmarks of a weapon that had been carefully chosen, named, and trusted more than kin. The operator stopped 4 feet from Huntington and 3 from Valdez. He did not speak. He simply stood, radiating an aura of coiled readiness that instantly made Huntington's aggressive swagger seem flimsy and theatrical. Huntington, momentarily flustered by the presence of true operational authority, straightened his spine. "Sir, this is a controlled logistics area. Unless you have a specific manifest..." The operator ignored Huntington entirely. His gaze was fixed, not on the sergeant, but on Cabo Valdez. His eyes, shielded partially by the low brim of his helmet, moved slowly, assessing every detail of her worn appearance. He noted the way she stood, balanced, ready to shift weight instantly, a posture learned under duress, not from scrubbing floors. He noted the economy of her movement and the intense, contained anger simmering beneath the surface of her quiet demeanor. His gaze dropped to her hands. They were raw from chemicals, but the musculature was defined, the tendons taut. Then he saw it. It was minuscule, almost invisible against the backdrop of her faded fatigues. A piece of jewelry, perhaps a ring, tied with thin black paracord and tucked deeply beneath the collar of her jacket, secured near the clavicle. It wasn't standard military issue. It was foreign, European. The operator's breath hitched, a silent internal sound. He kept his posture relaxed, yet the tension in the space intensified tenfold. He shifted his gaze back to Huntington. His voice, when it came, was a low, gravelly baritone, spoken without raising the decibel level above a polite conversational tone. "Sergeant, step away from the cleaner." It wasn't a request. It was an executive command, issued with the implicit threat of immediate catastrophic consequences for non-compliance. Huntington sputtered, regaining some of his bureaucratic confidence. "Sir, I'm trying to manage an essential logistics flow. This individual is impeding me over a requisition for coffee, and she's non-essential personnel." The operator took one slow step toward Huntington. The air pressure seemed to drop. "I heard you. You called her non-essential personnel. Step away from the cleaner." Huntington, seeing the cold, focused danger in the operator's eyes, instinctively took 2 steps back. He was used to authority, but this was a different species entirely. Authority earned in places where paper manifests held no value. The operator turned his full attention back to Valdez. His eyes narrowed, focusing on the small item tucked under her collar. He knew what it was. He recognized the shape. The detail was unmistakable, even beneath the collar. He spoke, still in that low, measured tone, not to insult, but to demand recognition. "Cabo Valdez," he said, using her name the first time Huntington had heard it. "You are wearing the uniform of a custodian, but the way you hold that mop handle suggests training in close-quarters polearm defense, and the scuff on your left boot heel is characteristic of a specific, non-standard field brace used for rapid deployment from rotary wing assets in high-altitude terrain." Valdez finally shifted. Her deep brown eyes met the operator's, and a flicker, a recognition of shared history, of shared ghosts, passed between them. She knew now he wasn't just Tier 1. He was someone who knew her history. The operator continued, his voice now laced with a profound, almost religious gravity, referencing the obscured jewelry. "And that artifact you have tied on paracord, resting against your sternum. It's too heavy for a typical pendant. It carries a distinctive, 6-sided geometry, slightly asymmetric, with an ancient Polish motto etched into the reverse side. Za ojczyznę I naród." He paused, letting the foreign words hang in the industrial air. Huntington was staring now, mouth agape, completely lost. The operator then spoke the name of the decoration, clear and slow, a pronouncement of immense reverence. That, Sergeant Huntington, is the Krzyż Walecznych, the Cross of Valor, the Polish government's highest military distinction for acts of conspicuous bravery in the face of the enemy, achieved at the cost of grievous risk to life. The name of the medal was merely the prelude. The operator now began to detail why Valdez wore it, pulling the backstory not from file data, but from a memory honed by operational awareness. He didn't look at Valdez for confirmation. He simply started narrating the past, his voice becoming the echo of a nightmare buried deep. Phase 4, the Crucible of Paktika, the expanded backstory. Paktika Province, Afghanistan, the operator began, the date precisely articulated. October 14, 2010, Operation Red Dagger Sweep. The objective was a high-value Taliban command cell operating out of a known compound nestled in the foothills south of the Organ district. It was supposed to be a surgical 3-hour snatch and grab. Huntington shifted his weight nervously. He had been processing paperwork in Stuttgart in 2010. This was not his world. The operator focused on Valdez. You weren't supposed to be there, Cabo Valdez. You were assigned as a liaison officer embedded with the Polish contingent's Provincial Reconstruction Team, PRT, paperwork, community outreach, bridge building. But your team, Ghost Platoon Polish 17th Mechanized, was wiped out days earlier by an asymmetric rocket attack. You were temporarily attached to the multinational response element. He closed his eyes briefly, synthesizing the details. That night, the air was cold, sharp, and carried the fine grit of loose soil. Visibility was marginal, half moon. You were riding shotgun in the lead MATV, call sign Puma 6. At 02:47 hours, exactly 7 kilometers from the target compound, the lead vehicle struck a cascaded IED array. The sound of the explosion, though 10 years old and 1,000 miles away, seemed to echo in the depot. It wasn't a standard pressure plate. It was a command-detonated EFP, fired from a buried claymore mine, designed to penetrate the floor plate of the MATV. The blast was instantaneous. It pulverized the driver and the gunner, leaving you, Cabo Valdez, then operating under the designation Lieutenant Commander, pinned beneath the twisted chassis, shrapnel embedded in your left thigh and abdomen. The operator spoke slowly, forcing the image into the warehouse air. Valdez stood motionless, the memory playing across her face like a phantom ache. The secondary contact was immediate. They didn't ambush you to destroy the convoy. They ambushed you to isolate the survivors and collect material. Standard kill and loot protocol. 3 heavy machine gun nests opened up from the ridgeline, pinning the surviving elements of Puma 5 and Puma 7 down in a ditch, 75 meters to the east. You were wounded, bleeding out. Your comms were fried. You had 1 rifle, a standard issue barrel, and less than 3 magazines remaining. The closest support asset was 45 minutes out, pinned down by mortars on the main road. The operator described the sound Valdez must have heard, the incessant tearing sound of 7.62-meter rounds stitching the air above the ditch line, the frantic high-pitched shouts of the surviving troopers, losing hope. You dragged yourself free from the burning wreck. You stabilized your wounds with a torn section of your uniform and a tourniquet cinched tighter than leather. The critical moment, Sergeant Huntington, was not your own survival. It was the realization that the ambushers were flanking the ditch, preparing to roll fragmentation grenades into the survivors. He looked at Valdez's hand again, the subtle grip on the mop handle. You made a decision that violated every standard protocol for a severely wounded officer. You decided to draw the fire onto yourself. You used the burning shell of the MATV as a shield. You engaged the enemy positions. The operator's voice rose slightly, the reverence deepening. But you didn't just suppress them. You advanced, single-handedly. Wounded, screaming through the night in Polish, Jestem gotov, I am ready. You convinced the ambushers that the main force had arrived, distracting all 3 gun nests. He detailed the choreography of death. You traversed 50 meters of open ground, moving through the concentrated fire that perforated the air around you. You took down the first heavy machine gunner with 2 precise shots to the viewport, silencing that position instantly. But the second position focused all their attention on you. They managed to hit your rifle, shattering the polymer stock. You dropped the weapon. A long, significant silence settled over the depot. Valdez closed her eyes, and the operator spoke the next words almost whispered, describing the act that earned the Cross of Valor, an act of primal, calculated aggression. You did not retreat. You advanced on the second position, unarmed. You pulled the 3 surviving fragments of the MATV's chassis, thick, jagged pieces of heat-seared steel, and you charged the position. They fired, but you moved too fast, too low, driven by adrenaline and the certainty of execution. You reached the nest. You used the jagged steel plate to shear through the neck of the first combatant, and the impact to shatter the orbital socket of the second. Huntington gagged faintly, a small, involuntary sound of horror. That engagement lasted 9.7 seconds. You neutralized the threat, secured the position, and used their heavy machine gun to suppress the third nest, buying the pinned survivors in the ditch enough time to flank and neutralize the final threat. By the time QRF arrived, you were unconscious, cradling the captured machine gun, having lost almost half your blood volume. The Krzyż Walecznik was awarded 2 weeks later. You were directly credited with saving 12 lives, enabling the subsequent successful retrieval of critical intelligence and turning a catastrophic loss into a tactical victory. The operator finished the mission report. He looked at Valdez, a salute unspoken but clear in his posture. You were medically discharged 3 months later. High honors, irreversible nerve damage in your dominant arm, significant internal scarring. You took a mandated permanent leave of absence from all high-ranking positions for psychological and physical rehabilitation. You chose anonymity, service in a different capacity, a way to keep your hands busy. Listened to. The operator's gaze swept back to Huntington, and the bureaucratic sergeant felt the full, devastating weight of the realization crash upon him. So, Sergeant Huntington, the operator said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level of intensity. When you speak of non-essential personnel, you are speaking of a woman who voluntarily bled out on the Afghan frontier to save a dozen soldiers you wouldn't be fit to shine the boots of. You are standing 3 feet away from a lieutenant commander, or former decorated commander, who has tasted dust and blood, and you are insulting her over 3 standard issue items that cost less than the polish on your belt buckle. Huntington's face had gone pale, slick with cold sweat beneath the harsh lights. He stammered, trying to articulate a defense that had evaporated instantly. I didn't know. I apologize. Cabo, Commander, sir, I am sorry. I didn't recognize the name or the history. Valdez looked at Huntington, her face impassive. She didn't accept the apology, nor did she reject it. She simply observed his disintegration. The operator stepped forward, positioning himself slightly ahead of Valdez, shielding her from Huntington's panicked gaze. The rank is irrelevant now, Sergeant, the operator cut in sharply. But the respect is not. She asked for 3 items, light bulbs, disinfectant, and coffee. You denied her, citing protocol and importance. He reached out and gently removed the small, crumpled requisition form from the wet floor, handling it with surprising delicacy. He smoothed out the wrinkles and handed it back to Valdez. Take this form, Sergeant Huntington. You will personally ensure that these items and 50 additional pounds of the highest grade specialized duty coffee we can find are delivered to the overnight utility station break room within the hour. You will also ensure that Cabo Valdez's current duty schedule is altered to give her 4 hours of mandatory rest time immediately. If I hear one word, one single complaint about her requisition, her duty, or her status on this base again, I will personally see that your posting is reassigned to the coldest, most isolated facility we have, cleaning latrines with a toothbrush. Huntington nodded frantically, his eyes wide. Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. It will be done immediately. He turned to leave, desperate to escape the scene. Stop! The operator's voice halted him mid-stride. Huntington turned back, trembling. "You still haven't offered the proper respect." Huntington tried to stammer out another apology. "I am profoundly sorry for my unprofessional behavior, Cabo Valdez. I deeply respect your service, your sacrifice, and your contribution to the force." Valdez watched him. There was no pity in her gaze. The operator shook his head. "No, not just the words. The true respect." He turned back to Valdez. He observed her for a moment longer, then in a slow, deliberate movement, he reached down to the customized rifle held loosely in his hands. This weapon, his life partner, was everything to him. It was a 5.56mm platform, meticulously maintained, etched with the names of his fallen teammates, bearing the marks of engagements from Mosul to the Hindu Kush. He never let it out of his immediate physical control. It was sacred. He shifted the weight and, using two hands, presented the rifle to Cabo Valdez. Stock first. It was the highest honor a warrior can pay another, trusting them absolutely with the instrument of their survival and their profession. "Commander Valdez," he said, using her formal rank, overriding her attempt at anonymity. "My name is Major Kaczmarek, Grom. I read the classified after-action report of Red Dagger Sweep. It wasn't just courage, it was tactical genius. You are a legend to the Polish 17th. I offer you my weapon, my oath, and my unwavering respect." Valdez's stillness broke. Her eyes, those deep, quiet pools, finally showed emotion, a flash of surprise, quickly masked by dignity. She had been recognized, truly seen for the first time in years. She slowly reached out, dropping the mop. The mop hit the floor with a wet, flat slap. She ignored it. Her hands, calloused and rough from cleaning chemicals, closed around the heavy, cold metal of the Major's rifle. She felt the weight, the balance, the familiar geometry. She ran a thumb across the fine etching on the foregrip, a small, almost hidden Polish phrase. Bog, honor, ojczyzna. She held the weapon for only a moment, a ritual acknowledgement of the honor, of the shared burden of the battlefield. Then, with a gentle, respectful motion, she handed the rifle back to Major Kaczmarek. "Major Kaczmarek," Valdez said, her voice regaining some of the strength it had held a decade ago. Clear, authoritative, and laced with command presence. "The coffee will suffice. And Major, thank you. It is good to be remembered." She gave the operator a quick, sharp nod, not a general's acknowledgement, but the recognition between two peers who had walked through the fire. The Major accepted his rifle, the tension instantly easing back into his powerful frame. He tucked the weapon back into a safe, ready position, satisfied. He turned to the trembling Sergeant Huntington. "You heard the commander. Go. Move." Huntington didn't need a second order. He executed a sloppy, terrified salute toward Valdez, the mop lady, and bolted toward the logistics office, the crunch of his immaculate boots disappearing rapidly down the corridor. Valdez stood still for a moment, the memory of the heavy rifle fading from her hands. Then with a sigh, she bent down, retrieved the wooden mop handle, and continued her slow, deliberate work of scrubbing the industrial floor. The Major watched her for a long minute. He saw the way she picked up the pace now, her movements smooth, professional, efficient. The hidden general reappearing beneath the apron. He turned to leave, but stopped at the edge of the light. "Commander Valdez," he called softly. She paused, looking up, the fluorescent glare catching the faint sheen of sweat on her temple. "I know that Krzyż Walecznik requires a certain level of humility, but they should know who they're talking to." Valdez gave a rare, weary smile. It was a smile of immense sadness and immense pride. "They need a clean floor, Major. That is what they know me for now, and that suits me just fine." She indicated the industrial mop with a slight tilt of her head. "It keeps the nightmares quieter than brass plates and flags ever did." The Major gave a final formal nod. He recognized the deep exhaustion of command and the need for peace, even in anonymity. "Understood, Commander. May your coffee be hot and your floors be spotless." He moved into the shadow of the corridor, his boots now silent, the subtle scent of ozone and combat equipment fading with him. Valdez returned to the oil stain. She scrubbed the epoxy floor with renewed vigor, the muscles in her arm flexing with the familiar, practiced rhythm of extreme exertion. She was just an old cleaner, wearing a faded blue apron. She was focused on removing the motor oil spill, a petty, frustrating hazard. But beneath the apron, beneath the stained uniform, the small, six-sided metal artifact rested against her sternum, the cold weight of the Krzyż, a constant, silent reminder of the war she survived, the men she saved, and the life she had abandoned for the quiet dignity of a mop and bucket. She scrubbed until the stain was gone, leaving only the sharp, sterile scent of disinfectant in the humming, quiet depot. The general had her floor to clean, and she cleaned it flawlessly.